So imagine that your wife, let's say, you're going to just use power to interact with her. Well, try it and see what happens. She's going to be miserable, and she's going to be resentful for sure. And maybe she's got more power than you when push comes to shove. Who the hell knows? Women aren't that easy to oppress. And so they have their own bag of tricks, that's for sure. And so, but at minimum, you're going to be setting yourself up for a loveless relationship based on mutual suspicion. And then imagine you tried to use power on your kids. Well, now and then you might have to use discipline. You might have to lay out the game rules, which isn't the same as like constraining them with oppression. But if your fundamental relationship with your kids is one of dominance, you're just a tyrant. And then if you try using that on your friends, well, first of all, you won't have any friends. The best you'll ever manage is henchmen, and they'll only be around you because they think they can get something out of your power. So they're the worst kind of friend because they're not even confident enough bullies to be bullies on their own. They have to hide behind another bully and be sub-bullies, and that's a dismal outcome. And then if you use power in your business relationships, it's like no one's going to be aligned with you, and the first time you make a mistake and you show any sign of weakness, your so-called business associates that you've just dominated because you have the power, they're just going to stab you in the back and leave. So it's a preposterous theory. It doesn't even work for chimpanzees. So the best work that's been done on chimps so far is being done by Frans de Waal. He'd be a very interesting guest, by the way. He's very smart, Dutch primatologist.
If you have his number.
Yeah, I could connect you. De Waal has been studying chimpanzees for 3 decades, and he's written a series of books about the emergence of proto-morality in chimpanzees. Now, chimps have to live in a social group, and for decades, and they have, you might as well call them friendships, because that's the closest analog, and they have to maintain those friendships. And they can't maintain them by dominance because, well, then obviously it's not a friendship. They have to maintain it by mutual grooming and caretaking. And so what de Waal has shown is that the alpha chimp, so you think of the alpha chimp as the roughest, toughest chimp in the troop, he's banging on sticks and threatening everybody, and he clambers his way up the hierarchy just like the Marxists would assume, and he establishes sexual superiority and propagates his genes. And the truth of the matter is, that's better than being weak and useless and dying, but it's not nearly as good as being genuinely reciprocal. And so what de Waal has shown is that sometimes the alpha chimp male is the smallest male in the troop, so that's pretty damn interesting. But more to the point, the alpha chimp is the most reciprocal member of the entire troop. So he's keeping track of his social relations. He's grooming his friends. They're interacting constantly. Like he's maintaining social relationships like mad. And there's 2 advantages to that, apart from the fact that he attains a certain degree of a reverence, let's say, and authority, and some preferential sexual access. So it's a good biological strategy. The troop is also more stable emotionally, partly because it's not ruled by a tyrant, let's say, who's always disrupting things. But the alpha, who's reciprocal, also can have a long reign. Because if you're one of those chimps that use manipulation and power to climb up the hierarchy, as soon as you show a sign of weakness, 2 of the males that you've oppressed will gang together, which chimps are very good at, and tear you into bits. And so de Waal has written very frightening accounts, very graphic accounts of these like revolutions against tyranny in chimp groups. And so the people who claim that power is the only motivation, they don't have a leg to stand on. It's just not true. And there's one more thing that goes along with that. 2 more things. One is, if you think power is the only motivation, that's your whole theory, then you're justified in using power at every step because there's nothing but power. So why not use power? And so it's a confession more than an accusation. And second, this is sort of germane to your criticism of the Queen. When systems deteriorate, power emerges as a fundamental motivation. And so part of the reason the Marxists and the postmodernists can be so attractive in their critique is because power does corrupt. And so whenever you look at any enterprise, social enterprise, any family structure, even any relationship someone has with themselves, you can say, well, look, to some degree, you're corrupted by misuse of power. And sometimes that can go way out of control, right, and be the dominant phenomenon that happens in totalitarian states. And you say, well, it's all about power. Well, it is when things get entirely corrupted. But that's a whole different proposition than everything's based on power. It's more like, well, hold it. Everything corrupt is based on power. But not everything is corrupt. And so now if you look at the monarchy, well,
right.
Then you think, okay, well, how do you separate the wheat from the chaff, right? How do you give the institution its due? You have the same problem with the British Empire, let's say, or with any expansive political enterprise. It's like, well, it's done some good. What's the good? And then it's abused its power. Well, how do we decide what's good and maintain that and value it? And how do we discern what's a misuse of power and criticize it properly and dispense with it?
You're a great
Very
podcast
difficult.
in this sense. That was my follow-up question, and you basically just answered your own question. But I guess that is. Are you acknowledging, in a sense, then, that there is an element of corruption around the Queen?
There's an element of corruption around everyone who isn't, what would you say, walking hand in hand with God in the Garden of Eden. Like,
right.
Look, there's a mythological trope that's very useful in understanding this. I presume that most of the people watching and listening have watched The Lion King. The Lion King has a very, very solid narrative structure. It's a very smart movie, like many of the Disney movies. And people criticize me because I'm so interested in Disney movies, but I'm interested in anything that many, 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 many people watch for a long time because, well, what's going on there? Why is that so attractive? And often a movie's attractive because it gets the story right and the characters right, whatever that means. Well, The Lion King was a very, very successful animated movie, one of the most successful movies of all time.
Can I just,
yes.
For those who can't remember, everything the light touches is our kingdom.
Right.
Yeah,
just
well,
to be
okay,
clear,
so what that means, I can tell you exactly what that means. That's a brilliant line. And that's also, and notice I used the word brilliant, and brilliant is associated with the idea of the light. Okay, so now, when the light touches something and you see it, then you establish a relationship with the thing that you see, because now you start to understand it. And the more lit up something is, the more you can understand it and explore it. And so when you shine a light into dark crevices, then let's say, then you start to see what's in the dark crevices. And if you go around your apartment building, let's say, and you pay attention to every nook and cranny, it starts to become yours in a very fundamental way. And so you could say, well, light is equivalent to consciousness. That's a good way of thinking about it. Now, why? Well, we're very visual creatures, human beings. Our brains are organized on vision. Most animals are organized on smell, by the way, but not us. We're organized on vision. A huge part of our cortical activity is devoted to sight. And so we think of sight as enlightenment, light. We think of it as illumination, right? When we bring something into the light, we improve it. And so we associate the day with consciousness and illumination and enlightenment. And so if you attend to something by shining a light on it, then it becomes yours. And so your kingdom is actually everything that the light of your consciousness is shone on. And all that's encapsulated in that statement. And that's why it's stuck in your imagination. Yeah, you remember he's up with his son on a mountain, right, on a cliff. And so now think about that. That means he can see a long way. And then he sees this circle of the world and the light shining on it. And he says, everything the light shines on is our kingdom. And then that also implies that, and he says that next, that outside the light, there's another kingdom. And that's the kingdom of darkness. And that's the place that hasn't been explored. And if you remember in the movie, that's where the fascists are and the hyenas. And the hyenas are predatory. And so when Simba goes out past the domain of the light, he enters the unknown and he enters the underworld, the demonic underworld. And that's Scar. Now back to Scar. Okay, so Simba has Mustafa as his father. And Mustafa's the positive aspect of the patriarchy. And he's wise and he's tough. He's got a set face. He's no pushover. But he has an evil brother, and that's Scar. And Scar has been scarred. And that's why he's resentful, right? He's a victim. And he's a victim because his brother gets all the attention, like Cain in relationship to Abel. And he's a victim because for some reason we don't quite
He's
understand.
physically smaller.
He's smaller,
He's not
but
the
he's
alpha.
intellectual too,
Yeah.
right? So he's got the Luciferian pride in intellect, and Jeremy Irons, who's that character, played that extremely well with that kind of unctuous voice that was
Kind of like a snaky sound.
Droning.
yeah, well, and also contemptuous and presumptuous and narcissistic. He did a lovely job of that. And so now you might say, well, why does the king have an evil uncle or an evil brother? Well, the answer is, this is the mythological answer, is that, well, the king always has an evil brother, always. And the reason for that is if the king is the emblem of the state, or even of the stable state of being, because you can think about it psychologically or sociologically, he always has a counterpart, and the counterpart is the proclivity of that state to be overtaken by willful blindness, so failure to shine a light on things, right, to turn your head away when you know you shouldn't, and also by this corrupt will to resentful power. And that's chronic. Now, the Marxist would say, and do in some real sense, there's nothing but Scar. There's nothing but the evil uncle. It's like, that's a hell of a worldview.